Hey, great to have you here. So today we're going to be doing something a little bit different and ranking the Soulsborne games. This subgroup of games has had some of my favorite AAA releases, and in my opinion, FromSoftware is one of the few remaining companies who hasn't tarnished their reputation at this point in time. Let's hope that does continue with the upcoming Elden Ring co-op game. For anyone who isn't familiar with the Soulsborne nomenclature, it's essentially the Dark Souls series, along with some other recent FromSoftware made games with similar mechanics. So Dark Souls 1 through 3, Demon Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and Elden Ring are the list of games we're looking at here. These games, while different in theme and other minor areas, really share the same core elements of things like leveling up back at a main hub via souls gathered from defeating enemies, checkpoints, whether it's bonfires, lamps, etc., where you rest and respawn enemies, as well as refill your healing flasks, an entire interconnected world where you unlock various shortcuts, memorable boss fights, some that are optional and may even be hidden, and others that are going to restrict your progression, similar combat styles including things like dodge rolling, NPCs with side quests, and deep lore hidden within item descriptions. These games are also super famous for giving you both high levels of frustration, but also complete euphoria and sense of accomplishment when you succeed. One final disclosure, this is obviously a subjective list. It's my own personal opinion, which may vary from your own list. Definitely let me know down in the comments below how you would personally rank these though. Alright, with all that out of the way, let's finally jump into the list. This will probably be blasphemous, but there's actually 2 games from this list that I never played through myself, so I think it's only fair, until proven otherwise, to place them here at 7 and 6. Based on reputation alone, I'm going to put Dark Souls 2 at 7th here. I've heard this game is a bit clunky and doesn't have the greatest level design compared to some of the others in the franchise. It's definitely widely viewed as the outcast from the Dark Souls trilogy, so we'll put it here at number 7. At number 6, you may be disappointed with this one, but I also did not play Dark Souls 1, so gonna put that here at number 6. I realize this started the trilogy and does hold a high place in video game history for shaping so many games that came afterwards. Maybe at some point I'll get around to playing the remaster, but for now at default, we're gonna put this in here at number 6. At number 5, I never played the original, but I did play the remake, and that's Demon Souls. So I didn't have really the nostalgia that you may have from playing the original one, so I realized that's going to factor in here somewhat. When this launched on the PS5, I was definitely intrigued by it though. To be honest, while I beat this game, I didn't really love the experience. I understand keeping true to the original, but I feel like in some ways the game lacked quality of life updates that, especially after playing Elden Ring, make the game feel quite dated even in its remake form. The level design I wasn't a big fan of. There's minimal save spots outside of after boss fights, which really just results in you needing to run through the entire level in order to replay a boss, which just felt quite tedious at times. For favorite boss in this game, the Flame Lurker is probably my pick. And overall, if I'm giving this one a letter grade, I would say probably somewhere in the territory of a low B, which is still somewhat decent by most video game standards. At number 4, we have Dark Souls 3. This really felt like the peak Dark Souls gaming experience. It provided a modern take on a classic style. The level design and boss fights were great. I don't really have anything negative to say about Dark Souls 3. There just happens to be 3 better games on this list. For most memorable boss fight here, I'll probably say either the Lorien Lothric fight or the Abyss Watchers. And once again, for giving the game a letter grade, I'm putting this one in the A territory. Next up was the hardest delineation of the list. At number 3, I'm going to go with Sekiro, but on any given day, this one could wind up being number 2. At this point, samurai games have become a bit saturated, but Sekiro still remains the top samurai-themed game for me personally. The parry system here is really what makes this Souls game unique from the rest. While that mechanic is used in some fashion in all the Souls-type games, it really stands out and shines here. And without learning it, you will not get past some boss fights. Genichiro is one that comes to mind there. The grappling system is also an awesome mechanic, not to mention looks sick aesthetically. Unlike other Souls games, most boss fights here are against humanoids, but one of the rare beast bosses here is the Guardian Ape, which I won't spoil the ending, but has a wild twist to it. My most memorable boss fight here was probably in one of the branching paths. You wind up facing the Great Shinobi Owl again, and this one took me quite a few times, so definitely that one holds a high regard for me. I was so pumped when Sekiro wound up winning Game of the Year, especially since from this list, this game is probably the most underrated in my opinion. So if you skip this one, I highly recommend you checking this one out because it's an S tier game for me. Next up at number 2 is another Game of the Year winner, S tier game, and that's Elden Ring. This game reshaped what Souls games could do, providing more of an open world than we've ever gotten before. The pro and con there is that players did wind up facing enemies that they were under-leveled against. The launch of this game was so successful, and I think it was a really great entry point for a lot of gamers into the Souls-like games. The lore is rich here as well, with George R.R. Martin actually being involved in the writing team. My most memorable boss fight here was probably Radahn, or maybe even something early on like Margit. From gameplay to level design to story, this is likely the most fleshed out FromSoft game to date, and you can clearly see why even the DLC was nominated for Game of the Year. Finally, that leaves one game. Based on what's left, you probably already know what it is, and that's Bloodborne. I even actually wore my Bloodborne shirt for the video here today. This was actually my first Soulsborne game, so I may be a little bit biased, but I just love everything about it. Both the gothic setting and the playstyle that rewards aggression by not promoting shields and instead allowing you to regain health by giving retaliation hits. Not to mention the best boss fights. I remember my first struggle against Vicar Amelia and feeling so satisfied after conquering them. My favorite fight here is probably the first required fight, and that's against Father Gascoigne. I love the kind of dance you do in that fight, just to have two hunters facing off in that first phase before things really escalate quickly in that second phase. For me personally, Bloodborne sits at the very top of S tier and is easily the best Soulsborne game and may even be my favorite game of all time. Hopefully at some point we do get a sequel here. So that's my list. What are your thoughts on how I rank these? As a recap, we had 7th, Dark Souls 2, kind of by default. At 6th, we had Dark Souls 1, also kind of by default. 5th, Demon Souls. 4th, Dark Souls 3. 3rd, Sekiro. Then Elden Ring at 2nd. And then 1st was Bloodborne. How would you rank each of these games? Which ones do you like? Which ones do you dislike? Just let me know your thoughts on all things Souls games down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and hope to talk to you again soon.